Well, welcome and thank you for joining the Berkeley Chamber of Commerce and the Berkeley Public Library today for a business boot camp. This is kind of a collaborative effort between the two of us that we started at the pandemic to help small businesses pivot toward online life. And the format has worked really well. So even as we emerge from pandemic, we're keeping it going. We have 4 courses per year. Anything from business finances to using public resources to prospect to planning your next website redesign. Beyond this event, the Berkeley Chamber has a goal of making Berkeley a place where businesses can thrive. We do that with monthly networking events, local and regional policy forums, educational workshops like this business boot camp that are led by sales and marketing experts, diversity, equity, inclusion seminars, Women Entrepreneurs of Berkeley events, and our marquee events, which include a holiday gift fair and guide, and then Berkeley Today and Tomorrow, which is like a Berkeley State of the Union and annual report on the Berkeley business landscape. We also provide ongoing advocacy efforts to represent member businesses on the city and state level. We connect businesses to local opportunities, help them navigate local resources and grants, and provide practical business support. I'm gonna introduce Peter Khoury real quickly and then hand things over to him. Peter is the CEO and founder of Magnetic Speaking. He is a certified professional neuro-linguistic programming coach, trainer, and strategic executive coach. He is a professional speaker and an expert working with executives and leaders to build their presence, skills, and confidence. Peter transitioned from his pharmaceutical engineering job and started his training career 20 years ago. He started training professionals on negotiation skills and conflict management, and after years of traveling nationally, decided to start Magnetic Speaking and share his speaking skills and experience with others. Peter is the author of the book Self-Leadership Guide, Be Empowered, Be Motivated, and he is very thrilled to be with us today. At the end of this session, we'll be sharing a promotional discount to extend your training in this corridor. And with that, I'm going to hand things over to Peter. If you have any questions, please use the chat window, or there's like a reactions button where you can raise your hand. And thank you for joining us today.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for being here. I'm so excited. Just a reminder about the promotional offer. This is a thank you gift from Magnetic Speaking, our company, to you. It's I put the link to an online course to help you with virtual presenting. And we're giving you, if you use the coupon code Berkeley 149, a 50% discount on the course. Just wanted to put that out of the way as a gift right from the start. And now let's jump into the presentation. Let me just share my screen and we'll start rolling. Okay, Robert, do you see, just to confirm that you see my screen? Perfect, perfect. All right, so I want to start with a little story here. So there's this person, and this person walks into a pet shop, and he sees a bunch of parrots with different prices, some normal prices, and 3 of them were very expensive. Like one of them was 1,000, 2,000, and 5,000. So this person walks up to the shop owner and goes, "What the heck is going on here? Why is this parrot priced at $1,000? I've never seen that before." And the owner, the shop owner, said, "Well, this parrot right here knows how to code websites." And the person was like, "Wow, that's impressive. $1,000, okay. How about the $2,000 one? Why is it priced $2,000? It must do more than the first one." He said, "Yes, absolutely." So the second parrot not only knows how to code websites, but also knows how to sell them online for small businesses. And the person was like, mind blown, like, what the heck does the $5,000 parrot do? And the shop owner looked at him and said, "I'll be honest with you, sir. I've never seen this parrot do anything in his life except The other two call him boss. And as you can tell from the story, it's easy to be called boss, but it's very, very hard to be called an executive or a leader. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Because to be an executive, you have to communicate with people and get them on the bus, keep them on the bus until you get to your destination. And for that, you need to be inclusive with your communication. You need to be broad. You need to bring people on board. And that's why this presentation is going to be focused on the 4 dimensions of executive communication. So you can get people on board. Now, when you are in the beginning of your career, let's say you're an individual junior engineer, you don't have to worry about this because typically leadership will include you into things, will include you into projects, will include you into presentations, will include you in the business. However, as you grow in your career, you become the leader, you become the executive, then it's your job to include everybody else. Make sense? And that's where communication comes from. Let me tell you a little bit about us first. So I am the founder of a company called Magnetic Speaking. We are one of the leading public speaking training companies in the Bay Area. We work with top companies. We work with their executives. We help them build up their communication skills so they can be more effective at work. And this is a picture, a GIF of us, some of the team members. We did this in the beginning of COVID because overnight, like everybody else, we had to go from an in-person office in San Francisco to virtual. And what ended up happening, the silver lining, is we went from a local company in San Francisco to now we have trainers and we do trainings all over the US, from Texas. We have a training coming up in Atlanta, New York, Texas, just in the next couple of months. We've been even operating in what do you call it? North of the border, Canada. I just lost track of that word. So we've been all over the place. So there is a silver lining. I am in this picture, as you can see. I am the founder of the company. I've been training and doing public speaking for the past 20 years. Before this, I used to be an engineer in the pharmaceutical industry. Introverted, shy, terrified of public speaking. I remember one time going to Toastmasters. I don't know if anybody here knows Toastmasters. I went to Toastmasters, and the first speech you have to give at Toastmasters, if you remember, it's called the icebreaker. I wrote 3 pages about myself, and I showed up, and I stand in front of the group, and I open my mouth. This comes out. And I ran out. That was what I did. And then I realized then that I had to improve if I want to change my career and if I want to enter the training business. So I took acting classes, improv, I did stand-up comedy. Don't get your hopes up. I performed once as a stand-up comedian in a club. I will never, ever, ever, ever do it again. If you think public speaking is hard, try stand-up comedy for one day. It's difficult. So I built my confidence, and then I started speaking for a living. And a year into my new career as a trainer, I realized that when I show up to trainings, I would have a small percentage of the audience riveted. Like they'd be like watching everything I say, and the others would be falling asleep. And I had no idea what was going on. So I asked my coach at the time, and the coach suggested that I look into a technology called format system, where you look at people's thinking styles. And he suggested that I'm only communicating to one thinking styles, which are the engineers in the room. And that changed the trajectory of my career. And this is the topic that I want to cover today, because it's going to help you tremendously. Because when you look at people, at any population that you communicate to, you will see that there are 4 distinct thinking styles in the audience. And if you only communicate to one, then you're going to miss 70% of the audience. So you have, as a leader, to diversify the way you communicate so you're more inclusive, so you can reach more people. Fortunately for us, it's very easy to do. I'm just going to walk you through the different thinking styles, advantages, disadvantages to each, and how to develop your weaknesses if you have weaknesses, so you can become more inclusive whenever you communicate. So when you look at any population, the first thinking style you need to be aware of, we call it the why thinking style, which means these are people who drive their brain and thinking by predominantly asking why-based questions, like, why am I here? Why is it important? Why are we doing this? So that doesn't mean that they don't ask any other questions to think, but they prefer internally to drive their brain by asking why-based questions. Typically, if you look at organizations and the C-suite, for example, typically the CEO of a big company would have a why thinking style. Yeah, you think of Steve Jobs, that's why thinking style. Yeah. Also, sales leaders in an organization typically would have a why thinking style. Yeah. Then we go into the second thinking style. That's the what thinking style, which means this specific group prefers to think by asking what-based questions. Like, what are the facts? What's the story? What's the history? What's the science? I am personally a what type of thinker, predominantly a what type of thinker. That got me into engineering because I wanted to learn the science and the background and the theory. And that's the what thinking style. Now, that doesn't mean they don't ask any other questions to think. It just means that predominantly they like to ask what-based questions. Then we go into the third style of thinking, and that's the how thinking style. These are people who predominantly think by how-based questions, like, how do we get it done? How do we move forward? How do we get over this obstacle? A lot of times, project managers would be how thinkers. By the way, what thinkers, an example of them would be engineers or CTOs of organizations, chief technical officers. How thinkers would be project managers or chief operating officers of organizations. If you look at the C-suite, how thinkers. My wife is a how thinker, and at work, they call her the bullet train, because the moment something comes up that needs to get done, done. Yeah. So that's the how thinkers. So we have why, what, how. Now we get to one of the most controversial thinking style. It's called the what if. Yeah, it's controversial because it's polar opposites. You have what if negative on one side, and you have what if positive on the other side. Yeah, the what if negative, usually people who always look at the risks. What if we go bankrupt? What if we lose this project? What if we get sued? Typically, if you look at the C-suite, you'll find that the CFO is usually a what if negative thinker. Yeah, always looking at, like, what if we run out of money? What if we're spending too much? Also, the council, the company council would be what if negative. What if we get sued? What if customers complain? They're always thinking about this thing. Then we have the opposite end, which is what if positive. What if positive are usually the optimistic bunch in the group. Usually the creative thinkers, the people that go, what if we take this idea from marketing and apply it to sales? What if we take this idea that's used in this separate market and apply it to our business? You'll find a lot of entrepreneurs as what if positive thinkers. For example, I'm predominantly a what person. That's what got me into engineering. I am a little bit what if positive person. That's what got me out of engineering to start my own business. Yeah. Now, in a team, you want a balance. In a marriage, you want the balance. For example, I am a what, my wife is predominantly what, my wife is predominantly how, and I am a little bit what if positive, my wife is a little bit what if negative. If my wife wasn't a little bit what if negative, you know what would happen? We would go bankrupt, because I'll be like, oh, let's invest in this big investment every year. So same thing happens in teams. That's why the executive team would have a CEO who is a why, would have a CTO that's a what, a COO, Chief Operating Officer, that's a how, and a CFO or a corporate counsel on it, that's a what if negative, because that makes a whole team. That makes it more efficient. Now, the problem is, and the reason I share this with you is because if you have a predominant style of thinking, then you will have a predominant style of presenting and communicating, because that's how you think about stuff. So if you're a what thinker, you're going to say, okay, I'm going to present to my team tomorrow, and you're going to be asking yourself what-based questions and answering them. And when you present, your presentation is going to be lopsided. It will be more answering what-based questions. And what's that going to do is the people on your team who think like you, what-based thinkers, will appreciate it. Everybody else will feel excluded and not included in the communication. Like I said before, early in your career, that's not relevant. However, as you grow and your audience and stakeholders become wider, then your communication have to be balanced across, right? So you have to address the why thinkers in your teams, the what thinkers, the how thinkers, the what if negative, what if positive thinkers. Make sense? So that's the whole idea here. If you want to be a great leader, more influencer as a leader, then you need to start adopting more of the thinking styles so you can reach more people and influence more people. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into each thinking style and address the pros and cons of each of the thinking styles and how to develop it if that's a lacking of you. And you want to be paying attention as I do the descriptions, because sometimes you might miss what your thinking style is. It's important to know what it is, so you know, okay, what do you have in the bag, and then what else do you need to develop? So let's begin. And after we do the why thinking style, we'll stop a minute to answer any questions if you guys have. If not, we'll just keep going. So let's start with the why thinkers. These are the people, like I said, that predominantly use why-based questions to think. Like they would ask, like, why am I here? Why is it important? Why X, not Y? Why now? Why do you want us to work at the office if we can work virtually? So you need to have answers for those, because a large portion of your population will be why thinkers. And you've probably been in a meeting where 15 minutes into it, you're thinking to yourself, why the heck am I here? Why was I even invited to this meeting? That just tells you that the leader of the meeting did not answer the question why you're there. Yeah. So if you're a why thinker, it's good to know. Now, the advantages of that is that you're covered for 25% of the audience. The disadvantage of just being a why thinker and not diverse with the other thinking styles, the biggest disadvantage is that people will start to view you as a shallow thinker. You've seen this before, where somebody comes and presents the why it's important and why are we doing this, and then you go, wow, there's no substance here. Yeah. So that's why, as a leader, you need to be balanced. If you're a why thinker, that's kind of the stereotype that you might run into. So you want to be balanced with that. Yeah. So how do you develop, if this is not your style, how do you develop it? You develop it in 3 ways. And for each of the styles, I'll walk through this process with you. First, you have to expose yourself to it. Then you have to practice in private, and then you have to start implementing. So what does exposure mean? Exposure means you steep yourself in an environment where people who think in why terms are communicating. That way you get adjusted to the language, you get exposed to the language, you get comfortable with the language. One of my favorite ways to get exposure is to read books by authors who write in that style. I don't know if anybody here have watched Simon Sinek or Brené Brown on TED Talks. They are an example of people who are why thinkers. And if you want to expose yourself to why thinking, then I would suggest read their books, because because that's going to give you the exposure you need to get comfortable in that space. Now, you will know if you're not a why thinker, because if you start reading it and you start cringing, you go, oh, it doesn't make any sense to me, then you know that you're not a why thinker. And that's even more important for you to read that book and get comfortable with that space. And if you've read Start With Why, for example, that's Simon Sinek. Simon Sinek made a big career for himself just by talking about the why. He talked about how big brands like Apple, how they became big and popular because they leveraged the why thinking of the audience. They told them why they should care, and how Steve Jobs was an effective leader because he used why all the time. He always communicated why he's communicating. And if you want to learn a lot about that, then these would be great resources for you. That will give you the exposure. The second part is to practice. Now, to practice, for practice, usually it's private. Like you have to do it on your own or take a class. We offer classes, go to Toastmasters and practice with them. You have to practice in private before you implement that work. Yeah. So practicing, for example, could be practicing saying why. When I was an engineer and I wanted to practice this skill because it was definitely not my wheelhouse, what I did, for about a month, every day I thought of an object. So for example, one day I thought, okay, a car. I'm going to think of a car. And then I sat down and I listed all the features of a car, which are the what, like what's the feature? What are the features? So windshield would be one, color red would be one, 4 tires would be one, sunroof would be another, all the what's. Then I would sit down and on the same piece of paper next to each what, I would write the why of each one. Why is it important? Like for example, 4 tires. Why is it important for a car to have 4 tires? In the beginning, I have to admit, I was resistant because that's not my thinking style. I was like, it's obvious. Like, why do we have to say the why? You do have to say the why if you want to be a leader. So I would force myself and write, okay, 4 tires give stability. That's why it's important. Then I would go windshield. Why is it important? Well, it protects you from rain, from wind, from bugs in your face. That's why it's important. And then over time, after a month, my brain got the hang of it. And I started to appreciate the why thinking style. And I stopped cringing because before, as an engineer, I'll admit it, as an engineer, whenever we had a salesperson come in, we would all cringe. Like, oh, like this is an alien coming in presenting to us. After doing this exercise for a month, I started to appreciate sales professionals. I started to appreciate the why thinking style when I listen to it, when I read it. And that's the importance of exposure and practice. Now, implementing, that's the third level. Implementing doesn't have to be complicated. Implementing why can be just, for example, you commit yourself that one time in one meeting per day, you're going to make sure you communicate the why of what you're doing. For example, if you're proposing that people come back to work, to the office, then force yourself to say, why is that important? If you are proposing a new tool, say, why is that important? If you're proposing a new feature for the website, then force yourself to say, why is that important? You don't have to overdo it. Just once you say it and get the feedback, once you get the reaction from the audience, that's going to be your positive feedback loop, and it's going to become part of your terminology. So that would be my challenge for you to develop your why muscles, expose, practice in private, implement at least once per day for a month, and then you're going to see big differences. Before we move on to the next style, which is the what, I want to share with you a story. One time, I was hired to do a consulting job for a tech company, and when I walked in, the problem was there was conflict between sales and between sales and engineering. And I immediately, when I joined their meetings, I realized that it was a communication problem. It wasn't a deep-seated issue, just they weren't understanding each other. So I go into the engineering meeting where salespeople are sitting and listening, and I see a lot of coffee cups on the table, and the engineers would get up and speak, and of course they're going to be what heavy, and I could see the sales professionals just falling asleep, not relating to the information, getting sleepy. And so that was a problem. Then I go to the other side where the salespeople, when they present and the engineers are listening, I saw the same phenomena where they're bored. They're probably thinking in their head, like, oh my, the engineers would be thinking like, oh my God, we just wasted a whole hour here with no substance. When in fact there was substance, but it was communicated at a different thinking style. And then working with the organization, just exposing them to this technology, that there are 4 different thinking styles, it smoothed things over. And at least they started to understand that the other side is not just BSing them, they're just communicating at a different level. And they started asking the appropriate questions to fill in the gaps. And that solved a lot of problems for that organization. So let me check in the chat if there are any questions. Feel free to share questions. I'm going to do them after each section as we go along. If not, then we wait till the end and you get to ask them out loud.
I don't see any questions in the chat and no raised hands as of yet, Peter. So
Awesome.
feel free to continue.
Great, great. I'm glad you guys are with me. So now we move into the second thinking style. We just covered the why thinking style. Now we cover the what thinking style. And you will know it if that's your style. Typically, people who think in what terms communicate in what terms as well. And typically they think of questions like, what are the facts? What's the background? What's the strategy? What is the theory? And very obviously, very important questions. However, if you are a predominantly what thinker and therefore what communicator only without diversifying into other thinking styles, the downside is that you're going to be viewed as 1, maybe boring, 2, maybe too detailed oriented, too much in the weeds. One time we had a client who's a VP and he was excluded from attending board meetings because the CEO of the company thought that he is boring the board. And of course, that was because he was a technical person and he would just go into the weeds, into the facts, into the details, and then not share the other side, which is the why it's important, how it's going to get done, the what if negatives, what if positives, to make his topic more approachable. Just small tweaks, and then he was able to get back on the board with simple tweaks. So that's the downside of just communicating with that. Also, another downside, if you're just a what communicator, it means you're only talking to 25% of the room, you're excluding 75% of the room. And as a leader, you can't exclude people, you have to be inclusive. So now, let's say this is not your style. If this is not your style and you don't use what-based language to communicate, then the downside for you, it means some people might judge you as not having substance. And you can't have that as a leader as well. Like, you can inspire with the why, but you need to have substance as well, because that's how you build long-term commitments. And lucky for you, it's easy to develop the style as well, just like with the rest of the styles. So the process is very simple. You have to expose yourself to the style. You have to practice. You have to implement. In terms of exposure, I would recommend, for example, Khoury's book. It's also a TED Talk. She is a what communicator. She did studies on body language and how it affects your confidence as a speaker. Like, for example, power pose like this before a presentation, that builds the hormones in your body that induce confidence. And she did studies around that and shared it with the world. It helped a lot of people. There's some controversy online about the validity of the research. I attest to it, like personally, and from my clients, I've seen it work all the time. You change how you sit, you change your body chemistry, you change how confident you look and come across. So I would read a book like that. If it puts you to sleep, then no, that's not your style. That's okay. Just stick to it. Just stick to it for a month, and then it's going to rub on you. It's going to steep. You're going to develop the ability to understand that language, because almost like a foreign language. If you are a crypto enthusiast or not a crypto enthusiast, and you want to really get the weights in and go to the gym for heavy lifting under what, then I would recommend the Bitcoin standard. Very heavy on the what, very heavy. Maybe go a few pages at a time until you build your stamina, until you develop your neurology to appreciate what thinking and what communicating. Now, for practice, it's the same thing. You have to, when you're developing your presentations for work, you have to start thinking about the what of things, like what's the evidence, what's the case. One example, we had a VP working with us, and she was trying to promote the idea of opening a branch of their business in Brazil. And every time she presented, people said they're not convinced. There's not enough proof that it's going to work. And immediately I knew she was doing a lot of the other communication styles, the why and the how, but she was missing the what aspect. So we sat together and we treated the move to Brazil, opening a branch in Brazil, like a law case. Like you're going to court and you have to show the evidence, like what's the market size? Is there a product market fit? And explore all these things and put them in the presentation as evidence. And her CEO, at the end of, after we did the revise the presentation, he sent her an email saying, thank you for the presentation today. It looked solid. That's what you're looking for. Looked solid. Isn't that amazing? That's when somebody says your reasoning is solid, it means you explored and you expressed the what of your topic. Now, implementing, it's the same thing. Instead of in private working on your presentation, you just implement in your next meeting. Make sure when somebody says an opinion, like for example, we need to open a branch in Brazil. And then you would ask the right questions, like, okay, what makes you think that? Or if you support it, you go, I agree. And then you talk about the market size or the population or the market product fit, and you support that person. And that way you cover the what. And after maybe a month of practice, you're going to become fluid in this language, and you're going to add it to your toolbox, and you're just one step closer to being a more inclusive and persuasive leader. And that covers the second dimension. The first dimension is the why. The second dimension is the what. Yeah. So let's look at if there are any questions. Okay.
Still no questions.
Fantastic. It means I'm doing great. All right. So let's do now the third thinking style, which is the how thinking style. Now, so if you have this style and you only use it, you don't use the other thinking styles, the downside is that people are going to perceive you as tactical only, which means when you're up for promotions, and I see this all the time with clients, when you're up for promotion, they're going to tell you, look, you're doing a great job. You get things done. However, and then they fill in the blank. They might say, you need to work on your communication skills. You need to work on your executive presence. Very lofty ideas, not concrete. We see it all the time. But basically what it means is you're not inclusive with your language. Not everybody can resonate with what you're saying. So to be a leader, you need to expand beyond the tactical. You need to expand beyond the how of implementing a project, how the process looks. You need to expand, answer the why, the what ifs of a project. And that's gonna change the perception of your team. Now, if you don't have this thinking style and you don't communicate to this thinking style, the problem is people are going to think that you don't have a plan. And I've seen it at our company, Magnetic Speaking. I had a person that wanted to be a director, and we're a communication company. And this person wanted to be a director and came to me and said, I want to be a director. I've been doing the work. I've been with you for 3.5 years. And the first thing that popped in my head, I wasn't sure if this person can do the job. I didn't think he has the how down of how we operate, how we run the operation. So I started asking him about that, and I noticed that he does have it. But I had the impression that he didn't because he's not a how thinker, and throughout his career at our company, he wasn't communicating that. Now, lucky for him, I know about the thinking styles, but imagine you're outside with managers that don't have that capability or awareness. Then you're going to be put in a box, and they're going to tell you to develop your communication skills, and it leads to nowhere. Yeah. So obviously you want to develop this ability to communicate in how thinking style. How usually would answer how to get there, how to implement, how to resolve, how to approach situations. Now, same process applies here. The way to do it is 3 ways: expose, practice, implement. For exposure, you need to read books like Getting Things Done. Listen to the title, Getting Things Done. That's a how book. Susie Orman, like How to Get Rich, how to reach financial abundance, all how thinkers and how communicators. For this topic, it's perfect. If you're a how person, you probably, most likely, if I have to guess, you don't need books like this unless you read them as candy. Like, for example, my wife is a how person, and people all the time, they ask her, how does she organize the team? How does she organize resources? And she goes, oh, I just do it on a piece of paper. And they're mind boggled because they think she's using sophisticated tools. But if you're wired that way, it's easy for you to think that way, and you don't need much tools. If you're not wired that way, then you need to develop the thinking style. And you also, most importantly, you need to develop the communication style. So at least these people in your audience who are how thinkers would feel that you're inclusive and you're bringing them on board with your communications. So for exposure, read books like these, watch YouTube videos on these topics, and that's going to give you the exposure and comfort with that. For practice, when you're building presentations, for example, let's say proposals, zoom in on the section of the how. Like, how is it going to get done? How are we going to get implemented? If we move into Brazil, like the previous case I shared with you, then how is that? You showed the evidence, you showed why it's important, then how it's going to be done step by step. And that's going to help you think through the hows. So when it's time to implement, which is the third step, is to, in meetings, in presentations, at least for a month, focus on sharing one how with the group, step-by-step process, so you can ingrain it in your system. So somebody's asking who is the Getting Things Done author. That's Robert Allen. David Allen. Okay, David Allen. I'm sorry. Yeah, somebody knows it. Great.
I actually have a question.
Sure.
When communicating with others, do you generally balance each of these 3 communication types, or prioritize one, or like kind of like read the audience and like adjust as you go forward? Or is it just like you want to be as inclusive as possible?
Yeah, you want to be inclusive as possible, specifically in the introduction. Let's say you're running a meeting. In the beginning, you want to say why you're running the meeting, why is it important, what's being covered, how it's going to run. Notice I'm covering all the thinking styles. Same with the presentation. You want to cover why you're doing the presentation, why it's important, what's going to be covered, which is the agenda, how it's going to be run, what if negatives, usually objections, And what if positive, if you add it, that's benefits, more benefits to the presentation. And most importantly, you want to practice fluidity between these four. Sometimes, let's say you work with your colleagues and the majority of them, let's say, are what thinkers, then you don't have to stress out a lot about balance. However, you want to have it in your pocket because that's not always the case. Like, for example, I show up here and I don't know anybody here except Danny. So I have to assume that it's a population of 25% what, 25% why, 25% how, 25% what if. And I try to balance as much as possible throughout the presentation.
Jesusita has a great question. Would one complete a test or assessment to determine which thinking style they are? If so, how? And with this, I guess we'll probably send a follow-up email that points them towards some resources as well as the promotional opportunity to explore these topics further with Peter. And
yeah,
I'll explain that more at the end of this, and I apologize. But if you have an answer for Jesusita.
Yeah, quickly. Like the best way is first self-awareness, like notice which style attracts you, which repels you. If, for example, you get bored when you listen to engineers, then you know maybe that's not your style. If you get annoyed when you listen to sales professionals tell you the benefits, then maybe that's not your style. Also asking people around you, like, what do you think is my style? Like, for example, if my wife asks me what's her style, I would right away say it's how. So that's the first step. Now, another step is there is a test called the format system test, which was developed by Bernice McCarthy, who is the founder of this technology. So Bernice McCarthy, she is an educator, and she developed this process for training teachers on how to teach kids in elementary schools and high schools. And she taught them about the 4 thinking styles. And I took that and I just made it simpler for communication in a corporate setting. But the origin is Bernice McCarthy. I would look her up. Awesome. Now we go to the most controversial thinking style, which is the what if thinking style. And I say, like I said before, it's controversial because it's polar opposites. You have what if negative and what if positive. And unfortunately, these professionals get the worst rap from everybody else, specifically if they're not diversified in their thinking and communication styles. For example, the what if negative person would be the doubter in the group, would be the downer, would be the party pooper, right? They would be labeled if they're not balanced. So that's why you need to watch out for this. If you are a what if negative person, you are a very valuable member to the team. Like I said, CFOs and attorneys sitting in an executive suite are typically this thinking style. However, you need to be balanced. Otherwise, it would be like the no sayer, like all the time. Also, for the what if positive, it's not if you're just what if positive person, then you're going to be the person who has the shiny object syndrome, or the person who does magical thinking, if you're not balanced. So you do need to be balanced. Otherwise, you're going to run into these stereotypes, which will hold you back as a leader. Yeah. So if you're one of those, you need to balance. If you're not, then it's the same thing applies. You need to work on it. You need to work on it, and you need to develop an appreciation for what if thinking. And I'll show you how in a little bit. So typically people who are what if thinkers, they would ask, what if we go forward? What if we don't? What if X happens? What if it doesn't happen? What if X changes? What if the Feds reverse their trajectory? What if interest rates keep going up, right? So obviously important things that we need to be aware of, and we need to communicate about. Yeah. So for this group, the expose part is typically a very, very fun part. If you like or you don't like if you like to read stories. Because if you want to develop your what if thinking, I recommend to clients, and it does magic. It does magic. I recommend sci-fi books. Sci-fi books are usually based on what if thinking. So if you want negative, it's dystopian, and if you want positive, it's optimistic. But it doesn't matter either way. Most books have both, and it trains you to think in that framework. So you can come up with downsides for projects. You can come up with upsides. It's going to change the way you think dramatically. Two books that I would recommend is Martha Wells, All Systems Red. I listened to this series with my wife. We're both sci-fi fans. We were blown away. The premise of this book is, what if a robot becomes sentient? And then the whole series is about that, and it explodes. And this is one of like the minority sci-fi books that are written by women. Phenomenal book. Yeah. The second one is, probably you've watched the series Dune. Dune is a phenomenal series. I read probably 10 of that series, 10 books of that series. And the premise of that series is, okay, what if there's a planet that has almost zero water, but has spice that the whole universe wants? Yeah. And then boom, that's a whole universe. Just starts out from that premise right there. I remember a scene in one of the chapters of the book where an ambassador goes to Dune from a water-rich planet, and he meets one of the locals, one of the local tribe leaders. And the first thing the tribe leader does is get close to that person, to the ambassador, and spits on the table. And then of course the guards pull out their swords and weapons, and they want to kill this person because he insulted the ambassador. And the ambassador says, hold your horses. That was not an insult. In this planet, because they're short on water, the spit is a gift. And that is what if thinking. Notice it just takes it to a whole new level. So first step is exposure. Second step is practice. When you're creating presentations, you want to think of, what's the downside of my project? What is the upside? What are the risks? And you want to think about all these things beforehand. And if that's not your thinking style, you need to force yourself to think about all that. Then implement is very easy. In your next meeting, you make sure at least for a month, in every meeting, you bring up a risk or you bring up an upside. And this is, even though it's the most controversial thinking style, in my opinion, it's one of the most fun to develop if you want it. Okay. So let's look at questions before I jump to the next slide. Thank you. This is awesome. Very helpful. Thank you.
Partha has a question. Can it be a successful style if a person thinks with all of these, or is it more like you recognize that you have a dominant one and have to deliberately introduce those other thinking styles into your mind?
Yeah, in a corporate setting where there are other people that you want to lead, the more diverse your thinking, the better. The better in terms of perception. Now, that doesn't mean, like, for example, let's say Elon Musk. Elon Musk is a what style. However, over the years, he developed his why communication style, because when he gets up on stage, he's inspiring. Like, he talks about colonizing Mars, expanding beyond the solar system, right? So he had to work on that. I don't think he would be as inspiring if he didn't develop his why communication style, because he would miss out on a lot of people and he would then attract only technical engineers.
And that's something that you develop through deliberately pursuing each of these other avenues where you may not have as much exposure or natural inclination, correct?
Exactly. If you want to be a leader. Now, if you want to be an individual contributor in a technical field and you don't mind, then you don't have to do these kind of things. You don't have to. You're in your silo. You talk to people who think like you. That's no problem at all.
Got it. Thank you. That was very helpful for me.
Awesome. Okay, so now how do you put it all together? Now, I know this question was asked before. Where do you use it? Do you use it throughout the presentation or not? Here are some recommendations for you when you're doing all the thinking styles. You want to be careful to make sure you include all thinking style elements in at least your introductions for presentations. Because think of your introductions as on-ramps to a highway. You want to on-ramp as many people as possible. And then once they're on the highway, you go as fast as possible. So in the introduction part, you want to be conscious of the thinking styles. You want to answer the why, the what, the how, what, the what if. And there's a formula for that. The product that we shared with you, that we teach you how to do it very effectively and very simply. The second and third part are updates and proposals. When you share updates, you want to share the why, the what, the how, the what if. Proposals, same things. What, why, what, how, what ifs. One time we had a client that worked at a big tech company, and she was proposing a women in tech leadership program at the company. And she was having a hard time selling it. And when I looked at it, she was missing a couple of components. She was doing the why, but she wasn't doing the what and the how. And then when we fleshed it out completely, she had the why, like we want to have a women in leadership program so we can have the diversity in our engineering leadership. Then that's the why and why important. Then she talked about the proposal, what it looks like, how it looks, and then how to implement it. And then the what if negative, she talked about if we don't implement the program like this, we're not going to look good in the industry, and we're going to maintain the status quo of 90% engineering managers who are males, right? So notice like all the elements are there. And then all of a sudden the proposal starting to get traction because it resonated with more people and had more sponsors, simply because now it reaches more people. Yeah. During facilitation, sometimes as a leader, you're not the content deliverer. Sometimes you're sitting in a meeting and everybody's contributing, and your job is to assemble it and facilitate a good discussion, part of the team. So as a leader, be conscious of the thinking styles and ask relevant questions. If everybody's covering everything except what if negative, maybe you need to jump in and say, I want to be the devil's advocate here. What if it doesn't work? What if the FDA doesn't approve our drug? What if customers don't come back to the office? Make sense? So you want to be balanced and help your team become more balanced so they can make better decisions. And with that, I will end the presentation, because your job as a leader, the higher it goes, the broader your reach needs to get. And with that, your communication has to become more diverse, more inclusive, so you can get more people on the bus to go to your desired destination. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Berkeley Public Library, and thank you, attendees, for joining us today. This was a engaging and informative presentation. I'm gonna open up the floor to anybody that has questions. Feel free to unmute yourself, and we'll be sending a follow-up email with instructions to engage further with Peter. He has promotional opportunity for discounted one-on-one training in this. Also have information about the Chamber of Commerce for those who are not already members. And there will be a recording on our Berkeley Chamber website, and in the follow-up email, I will have a link to that. It'll take me probably half of the day, or it'll be early tomorrow or on Monday that link will get sent to you, Deb.
Awesome. Any questions? Any questions are welcome regarding this topic or any other topic about leadership, communication, influence, anything you want.
My question is a little bit of an expansion of earlier questions that both Partha and I had, is when presenting to specific certain audiences, do you often or sometimes find yourself prioritizing specific types of messaging because you have a deliberate agenda or specific goal, or that you recognize, like, I'm presenting to engineers today, I know what might resonate with them?
Yeah, you do that. If, let's say, you're presenting to engineers, then you'll be heavier on the what aspect. However, I wouldn't discount the others. I would include them, because that's going to make you sound more like a leader. Because remember, this is a population issue. Even if we go to the population of engineers, like let's zoom in on engineers alone, then they spread out. Some of them are more Y inclined. Some of them are more what inclined. Some of them are how inclined. So for example, me and my wife, we met in engineering school. We both studied chemical engineering. Now we're both different. Like she's how inclined, I am what inclined. Yeah. So even with any population, when you zoom in, they spread out. So you need to be balanced as well.
Awesome. Thank you. And I have other questions, but like they get very finely detailed, and I'll ask those one-on-one with you at some point.
Awesome.
And if anybody else.
Yeah, I'm Victoria Curtis. I have a question. I'm 62. I'm 62 and I've been a realtor 36 years. So I've taken a lot of psychology tests such as Myers-Briggs, DISC, etc. Do you have any other psychology tests you recommend?
Other psychology tests? I would take the format test to help you zero in on your thinking style and therefore your communication style. And I'm willing to bet, if you've done real estate, you've interacted with a lot of people. Intuitively, I have to say you must have developed a strong ability to detect, other people that you talk to and their thinking style and adjust. This would just take it to the next level, so it becomes more conscious for you.
Yeah, I agree. I was in Business Networking International for 10 years, and I took a test where I was pretty much half driver and half promoter. So I was half like a project manager and then half rah-rah cheerleader, keep the ball going.
Yeah.
So it was really interesting because you couldn't go on either side of the room because you're like halfway between the two. Yeah, but I did have to alter myself because sometimes I'm dealing with nurturers or sometimes I'm dealing with engineers. So I kind of have to tweak my presentations or my style with them so that they don't glaze over.
100%, 100%. And this is like for people who are socially savvy. I wasn't socially savvy. I had to develop social skills later on in life. But for people who are socially savvy, this comes natural. Like, for example, my wife and I were in Vancouver for New Year and we went to a shop, and this lady at the shop was fantastic. She was selling like hotcakes, things. And then I am listening. I asked my wife, do you notice that she changes even her dialect a little bit, depending on who she's talking to? And she was like, just to relate quickly, immediately in the moment to the people. Yeah, which is
funny. That's funny you should say that because some of my friends call me a chameleon.
Yes,
a chameleon. I can change depending on who I'm dealing with.
Exactly. I can't do that, but I can get close, just by being diverse and with my communication.
Yeah. Okay. So how do we find the format?
We will send it to you in a link. I'll send a link. It's not like the format system is a different company, but we will send you their link as well.
Okay, thank you.
And one last question before we get going. Want to be sensitive to everybody who has to get back to work after the lunch break. It's from Deb, and she's wondering if you could quickly hash out the course offerings that you're offering as a follow-up and describe those.
Yeah, so the course, it's our online course, and it covers virtual presenting from 4 different angles. First angle is delivery, like what do you do with your hands? How do you look at the camera? That sort of thing. And your comfort level of confidence. So that's delivery. Second is messaging, which is like, it's going to take whatever we cover today and put it to practice. So you'll get a formula for introductions, formula for formulating your presentation. So it's balanced. So you don't have to just use your intuition. You would have a system in place to do it. Third is storytelling. You learn the 6 stories every business leader must know how to tell. Like usually we get frazzled when somebody tells us we have to tell stories, is because we think we have like this overwhelming thing, storytelling. But we give you 6 stories that you need to know and formulas to create them. And the last one is impromptu, how to think, like tips on how to improve thinking on the spot, like when you're asked questions. And we do these trainings live, but we also have them in a digital format. That's the offer we're giving, is the digital format, and you get 50% off. Usually it's $300, you'll get it for $150.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Peter. And thank you all for joining us today. This was great. And maybe if I can get the chamber to sponsor it, I'll be joining you for one of those sessions as well.
I love it. Love it. Thank you.
And everybody, hope you're weathering the storms well, and have a great week. And we hope to see you at an upcoming chamber event, which you will find out about in our follow-up email. And thanks again. And I'm gonna pause or quit the recording. And thank you again, Peter.
Thank you.